What's happening right now isn't something you can describe as rising tension anymore. That phase is already over. For a long time, the situation between the United States and Iran was mostly indirect. Warnings, sanctions, political pressure, and occasional proxy conflicts happening in the background. It stayed in that gray zone where both sides were careful not to cross a certain line. But now, that line has already been crossed. We're seeing actual military actions. Not threats, not speculation, but real operations happening on the ground and in the air. Strikes have taken place, targets have been hit, and responses have followed. These are calculated moves, not accidents, which makes the situation even more serious. And the key difference this time is speed. Everything is happening fast. One action is immediately followed by another. There's barely any gap left for de-escalation or diplomacy to slow things down. That kind of pace creates pressure, and pressure increases the chances of miscalculation. Another important shift is visibility. This isn't something hidden behind closed doors anymore. The world is watching it unfold in real time. Reports, footage, official statements. Everything is coming out quickly. That level of exposure changes how decisions are made, because now every move sends a global message. At the same time, both sides are showing they're prepared, not surprised. Military positioning, readiness, and response times all suggest that this wasn't something sudden. It looks like both sides had already been preparing for a scenario like this, which is why the reaction hasn't been hesitant. It's been immediate. And when you combine all of that, direct action, fast escalation, global visibility, and prepared responses, it becomes clear that this is no longer a situation sitting on the edge of conflict. It has already stepped into it. What really shifted the entire situation was the moment Israel decided to take direct action. These weren't random strikes or symbolic moves. They were highly targeted, focused on specific locations tied to Iran's military presence and influence in the region. That level of precision tells you something important. This wasn't a reaction in the moment. It was planned. For years, Israel has viewed Iran as one of its biggest long-term threats, not just because of direct confrontation, but because of Iran's growing network across the Middle East, allies, proxy groups, and strategic positions that extend far beyond its own borders. So when these strikes happened, they weren't just about hitting a target. They were about sending a message that said, "We know where you are, and we're willing to act." That kind of message changes the entire dynamic, because now it's no longer about quiet tension or indirect pressure. It becomes personal, visible, and immediate. Iran can't ignore something like that without appearing weak, especially on a global stage where perception matters just as much as power. And that's exactly why the situation escalated so quickly after. The strikes forced a response. Not responding would have meant losing credibility, not just internally but across the region where influence and reputation play a major role in maintaining power. So the pressure on Iran wasn't just military, it was strategic and political too. At the same time, these actions pulled more attention from the United States, because Israel isn't operating in isolation. There's a long-standing relationship there, military, political, and strategic. So any major move by Israel automatically increases the chances of U.S. involvement, even if indirectly at first. That creates a chain reaction. One strike leads to a response. That response creates pressure for another move. And suddenly, what started as a targeted operation begins to expand into something much bigger. And the most critical part is this. Once that first major move was made, there was no easy way to go back to how things were before, because the balance had already been broken. When Iran responded, it wasn't just a symbolic move or a statement meant for headlines. It was a calculated show of capability. The response was designed to prove one thing clearly, that Iran is not only willing to react, but fully capable of doing so across multiple fronts. And that matters, because in conflicts like this, perception of strength is just as important as actual strength. Instead of rushing into a chaotic reaction, the moves appeared measured. Targets weren't random. They were chosen in a way that signaled reach, coordination, and intent. That kind of response tells observers that this isn't emotional retaliation. It's strategic. And strategy changes everything. Because when a country demonstrates controlled retaliation, it shows they're thinking several steps ahead. It's not just about answering one strike, it's about setting the stage for what could come next. Another important detail is how wide the response can stretch. Iran doesn't operate only within its own borders. Its influence extends across different parts of the region, through allied groups, partnerships, and long-established networks. That gives it flexibility. It can respond directly or indirectly depending on what creates the most pressure. And that uncertainty is what makes the situation more dangerous. Because now, it's not just about where the next move will happen, it's about how and through whom it might happen. At the same time, the response sends a message beyond just Israel. It reaches the United States as well. It's a signal that any further involvement won't go unanswered. That escalation won't be one-sided. And that if the situation continues to intensify, the consequences won't stay limited to a single location. What makes this even more serious is the pace at which responses are happening. There's very little delay between action and reaction now. That short gap reduces the chances for diplomacy or de-escalation to step in. Instead, it creates a rhythm of escalation, where each move naturally leads to another. And once that cycle begins, it becomes harder to control, because every response raises the stakes just a little higher. What makes this situation even more serious is that the United States is no longer just observing from a distance. It's already part of the equation. At first, the involvement may seem indirect. Statements from officials, diplomatic positioning, increased surveillance. But when you look closer, there's much more happening beneath the surface. Military assets have been repositioned, forces have been put on higher alert, and strategic coordination in the region has clearly intensified. These are not the kinds of steps taken by a country that's simply watching. They signal readiness. And readiness means preparation for multiple scenarios, not just defense, but potential escalation if required. Another key detail is how deeply connected the U.S. is to what's happening around Israel. This isn't a distant alliance, it's one of the strongest strategic partnerships in the world. So when Israel takes action, it naturally increases pressure on the U.S. to respond, support, or at the very least, stay actively engaged. That creates a situation where staying neutral becomes almost impossible. Even if the intention is to avoid direct conflict, the level of involvement, intelligence sharing, military coordination, regional presence, means the U.S. is already influencing the outcome. And influence can quickly turn into participation. There's also the question of credibility. If tensions rise further and the U.S. chooses not to act, it risks sending a signal of hesitation. But if it does act, even in a limited way, that action can trigger a wider response from Iran. So every move becomes a calculated risk. At the same time, internal pressure plays a role. Decisions aren't made in isolation. There are political expectations, security concerns, and global perceptions that all shape how the U.S. responds. Allies are watching. Opponents are analyzing. Every statement and every action is being interpreted in real time, and that creates a constant push toward involvement, even if it starts small. Because once resources are committed, once coordination increases, once presence expands in the region, it becomes much harder to step back. The line between supporting from the outside and being directly involved starts to blur, and over time, that line can disappear entirely. One of the most overlooked parts of this situation is that Iran still has a significant amount of military capability that hasn't even been fully used yet. A lot of people assume that after initial strikes and responses, most of the damage is already done. But in reality, what we've seen so far could be just a fraction of what's actually available. Iran has spent years building and strengthening its defense and attack systems, not just in one area, but across multiple layers. This includes ballistic missiles, drone technology, and underground facilities designed specifically to survive targeted attacks. And that changes the equation completely. Because even if some sites are hit, it doesn't mean the overall capability is gone. In fact, many of these systems are designed to stay hidden, mobile, or protected in ways that make them difficult to eliminate in a single wave of attacks. Another critical factor is distribution. Iran's strength isn't concentrated in just one place. It's spread out, geographically and strategically. That makes it harder for any opponent to predict where the next move might come from or how strong that move could be. It also means that the response doesn't have to be immediate or obvious. They can choose timing, they can choose location, they can choose method. And that level of control creates uncertainty, which is one of the most powerful tools in any conflict. At the same time, there's a psychological impact. When one side knows the other still has a large reserve of capability, it forces them to think twice before escalating further. Every decision becomes heavier because there's always the possibility of a stronger counter-response waiting. This is where things get even more complex, because it's not just about what has already happened, it's about what could happen next. And with a wide range of options still available, from long-range strikes to indirect responses through regional influence, the situation remains unpredictable. That unpredictability keeps the tension high, even during moments that might appear calm on the surface. Because underneath that calm, there's still a lot of power that hasn't been used yet. What makes this situation even more dangerous is how quickly it can move beyond a regional conflict and start affecting the entire world. Right now, it may look like a situation mainly centered around the United States, Iran, and Israel. But in reality, the impact of their decisions doesn't stay limited to just these countries. The moment escalation goes a step further, other nations are almost automatically pulled into the equation. Allies begin to take sides. Military partnerships become active. Defense agreements start to matter in real time. And suddenly, what started as a focused conflict begins to expand outward. One of the biggest pressure points is global energy. The Middle East plays a critical role in oil supply routes, and any disruption, even a temporary one, can send shockwaves through global markets. Prices can spike quickly, and that doesn't just affect governments or industries. It affects everyday people. Fuel costs rise, transportation becomes more expensive, goods and services follow the same pattern. At the same time, financial markets react almost instantly. Investors don't wait for certainty, they respond to risk. And a situation like this introduces a level of uncertainty that spreads across economies. Stock markets can drop, currencies shift, and global trade starts to feel unstable. But it's not just about economics. Military escalation brings strategic consequences. If one major power increases its involvement, others may respond to maintain balance. This creates a chain reaction where each move is matched or countered, increasing the scale step by step. And then there's the risk of miscalculation. In high-pressure situations like this, decisions are made quickly. Communication isn't always perfect, and even a small misunderstanding, a misinterpreted signal, a delayed response, can trigger a much larger reaction than intended. That's how situations spiral. Not always because someone planned it that way, but because the environment becomes so tense that control starts slipping. Another layer to this is how modern conflicts are no longer limited to just physical battlefields. Cyber activity, intelligence operations, and strategic disruptions can all happen alongside military action. That means the impact isn't always visible, but it's still very real, affecting infrastructure, communication systems, and national security in ways people don't immediately see. And when all of these factors come together, global alliances, economic pressure, military reactions, and constant uncertainty, it creates a situation where a single move doesn't just stay local, it echoes far beyond the original conflict zone.